Hi, it's Ian from Huge Menace, and in this Blender tutorial, we're going to create a desk lamp using our free add-on for Blender called ND. If you're new to ND, it makes it easy to model using a non-destructive workflow. And in this tutorial, you'll learn the fundamentals of this approach. This is a follow-along style video suitable for beginners, so I'll explain in a step-by-step process. Our challenge today is to model a simple but stylish desk lamp called the Echo Lamp, designed by Simon Busser Studio. We'll aim to recreate this fairly closely, but tweak a few minor details of the design to keep things beginner-friendly. We'll start by installing the ND add-on and preparing our scene, before moving on to modeling the main shapes and forms. And to finish, I'll give you a quick overview of my lighting and render setup. Okay, let's get Blender and our scene set up and ready to go. Select everything and do a ritual sacrifice of the default cube. Now that we've shown Blender who's boss, we want to make sure we've got ND installed. So if you go to the preferences and go to get extensions, you can search for it by typing non-destructive, and you can see there it comes up. So click to install, and it shows up as installed. The next thing I want to do is make sure that my scene units are set to something that works well for me. In my case, I want to set this to millimeters. And then lastly, I don't need the animation timeline, so I'm going to switch to the modeling workspace. Let's start with the base of the lamp. In a typical polymodeling approach, you might begin by adding a cylinder primitive. So press Shift-A and go Mesh, Cylinder. Now this allows you to adjust the vertices and the radius and the depth. But the problem with this is as soon as you commit to it, you no longer have those options. For a non-destructive workflow, we want to be able to modify the radius, segments, and depth of the cylinder at any stage in the future. So we need a way to construct this in a more procedural manner. Luckily, we can achieve this with the modifier stack, and you'll see how ND helps us work like this efficiently. I'm going to delete the cylinder, and we want to think about how could we recreate that in a more procedural manner, maybe using the modifier stack. And it's helpful to think about how you might break that cylinder down into something even simpler. So perhaps we could start with a profile, a circle, and then extrude it. So we're going to go Shift-A, and we're going to construct our circle also in a procedural manner instead of selecting circle here. So I'm going to choose plane, and the base of the lamp is 140 millimeters. It's quite small in the viewport, so once I type that in, I'm now going to press Shift-C to zoom in. And this is our base geometry, but we want to be able to bevel this to turn it into a circle. And ND helps us with this. So if we go Shift-2 and then go Sketch, Circularize, you see that it starts to turn it into a circle and the ND overlay comes up within the viewport. Now, if you move your mouse from left to right, that will change the number of segments. You can also scroll and you can also type in a specific number. In our case, we want 16 segments. That looks pretty good to me. Now you can click or press Enter to confirm. You might be wondering, what has this actually done? If you press Tab for a moment, you'll notice that in edit mode, we still have our plane. So that's our base geometry. That means that the circularize is acting in a procedural manner. If we head over to the modifier stack, you can see that ND has orchestrated this for us. It's added a bevel modifier and a weld modifier. If we take a look at the bevel modifier, you can see it's added a vertex bevel with 16 segments. And it's totally okay to go ahead and change these values. That's exactly what we want. We want this non-destructive approach that allows us to change parameters at any time. ND has also added a weld And that's just ensuring that if any generated geometry creates overlapping vertices, that it's going to collapse those down into a single vertex. You can also recall an operator in ND. So it doesn't matter whether you change the parameter you need in the modifier stack, or if you press Shift 2 with the object still selected and go back to circularize, you'll see ND respects the value that you already had, and you can go ahead and change that again. I'm going to make sure mine says 16 and hit enter to confirm. The next thing we want to do is extrude this so that it's got some depth. Again, ND can help us with this. If you press Shift 2 and then choose Extrusion, Solidify, again, the ND overlay comes up and you can scroll to increase the thickness parameter. Now, if you move your mouse as well, it's quite sensitive in this case, but you can change the height that way as well. In our case, I'm just going to type in 16, and you've got a few different options here as well. So there's offset, which if I hold down Control and I scroll, you can see that it allows us to offset this from the origin. And you've got weighting. Now, if I press W, you'll see it goes from neutral, which is the middle, to positive. That moves the extrusion upwards. Or if I press W again, to negative. So you can change how the solidify works in relation to your object origin. We want to use positive. And I'm going to click to confirm. Again, if you look at your modifier stack, you can see that ND has orchestrated the process for us. It's added a thickness here, and it's set the parameter. Again, totally up to you if you want to change this within the modifier stack, and ND will just help you work with that more easily. We've basically replicated the cylinder primitive now, except that it's fully procedural. So you can go ahead and change the number of segments, and you can see that that respects the extrusion as well. And this is how we achieve the basics of our non-destructive workflow. It means we can change these parameters at any time, and this series of operations apply, and you get this non-destructive parametric way of editing objects. The next thing I want to do is to smooth off this cylinder. So I press Shift 2, and we want to go to Bevel's Bevel. This will apply an object bevel. You can see it turned up in the modifier stack. I want a width of 2, and I'm going to hold down Alt to change to the segments option, and I'm going to type 4. And that gives us a nice little rounded edge there, and press Enter to confirm. One thing you may have noticed is that the shading changed because of this edge, and the normals were affected. So it doesn't look perfect right now. So what I'm going to do is apply a weighted normal modifier. And to do this, again, ND helps us. Press Shift 2, go to Shading, and do Weighted Normals. And now you can see that it flattened out the normals. It made sure that the normals look more appropriate for this shape than they were just before. So in the design of this lamp, it has a base, and then there's a little indent where the stem is then connected to this base. So that's the next thing I want to try and create. Before I do that though, I just want to make sure that I've got my object selected, and in the outliner, I want to keep things organized. So I'm going to rename that to base. That's going to help a lot in future so we can keep things nice and organized. So I want another cylinder, and I want to Boolean and kind of cut a hole in this base. So press Shift A, and go Mesh Plane. We're going to do a similar thing that we did before. This time we want 30 millimeters, and again, we want to circularize it. So press Shift 2 and go Sketch, Circularize. Now this is a smaller circle, so I'm going to choose 8 segments, and that should be sufficient. And I'm going to click to confirm. And I want to extrude it as well. So press Shift 2 and go Extrusion, Solidify. Now, if I start increasing the thickness, it's going in both directions around the object origin. I want this to go upwards, so I'm going to press W to make it positive. And I don't want this to punch a hole the entire way through the base like a donut. I want it to be offset a bit. So if I hold down Control and scroll, maybe I'll move this up about 10 millimeters so that it's not going to punch a hole the whole way through. And I've got the thickness set here so that it's just poking through a bit. You don't want it to be completely flat on top. You want it to poke through a little bit, so that when we do our Boolean operation, it applies it correctly. I'm just going to click to confirm this. And now we've got our base and we've got an object we're going to cut a hole with. So I'm going to rename that object to base cutter. You'll see why that's useful in just a moment. So we're going to, with the base cutter selected, we're going to press Shift and we're going to go Shift 2 to bring up ND, go Booleans, difference. Now, the immediate thing you notice is that the Boolean is applied, but you can also see the cutter object, and it's a wireframe. So ND has created a utility collection for us, and it's put that base cutter in that utility collection. And if we select the base object, you can see it has applied a difference Boolean, and it's actually put that below the bevel, which is quite useful. That's exactly what I wanted. Now, it has also parented that base cutter to the base, and that's pretty important because if you press G and move that around, you want to make sure that Boolean follows the object you cut a hole into. Now, you may not always want to see this utility object. It won't render currently, but if you don't want to see it, and it can help you, you press Shift 2 and go to Viewport, Utils Visibility. That will turn that off. But there's a shortcut for that, and we actually want to bring that back for a moment. You press Alt-V to bring up the ND viewport menu and click Utils Visibility. What I want to do is create the base of the stem now, where it connects to a welded stem. And I could do the same thing I've already been doing, which is to add a plane and circularize it. But ND has an option here that allows us to make use of our utility rather than having to recreate the exact same shape. So if I select the base cutter utility, if I go Shift 2 to bring up ND and then go Booleans hydrate, this option allows us to duplicate that utility and create a new object out of it. So it's going to ask us which collection we want to place this in. I'm going to scroll to choose the collection called collection. And you've got an option to clear the parent. Now, because the base cutter is parented to the base, it defaults to creating this new object as a child of the base. But I'm going to press C to clear the parent, and I'm going to click to confirm. That has added a new base cutter object of the same size. I'm going to rename that to stem base. Now, I don't really want to see my utility here anymore, so I'm going to press Alt-V and Utils Visibility to hide it. Now, this is great. It's been a bit of a shortcut to creating the same shape, but we don't need it to be that tall. So we can just press Shift 2, go Extrusion, Solidify, and we're just going to scroll down until that's flat with the surface. I think 6 millimeters is correct. I'm just going to check that in front view. Yep, that looks correct to me. I also want to apply a bevel to this object. So I'm going to press Shift 2, go Bevels, Bevel. And in this case, I'm going to make the bevel a little bit smaller, so 1 millimeter. And I'm going to hold down Alt, and we're going to maybe do 3 segments. That looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to click to confirm. If you're wondering what the geometry actually looks like when you're editing in a non-destructive manner like this, it is quite useful to turn on wireframes. ND has a shortcut for this. If you press Alt-V, you can also turn on the wireframes through the viewport menu here. And that's really useful. As you can see the base and then the stem base, and you can see the geometry that's ultimately generated based on the procedural operations. Okay, so the next part of the lamp I want to model is the stem itself. This will be easier in front view, so I'm going to press 1 on the numpad, and I'm just going to zoom out a little bit too so that I can see what I'm doing. Now, again, this object, if you think about it, you can probably break it down into something a bit simpler. So I'm going to start with a plane, press Shift A, go Mesh, Plane. This is aligned to the world right now, so I want to align that to View. And in my case, I want this to be 480 millimeters. Now, that's created a square. I can't change the dimensions separately, so I'm going to press N to open the transform properties. And I want the width, or the X, to be 30 millimeters. But I've just changed the width of this object at the object level. We're in object mode. And that's a problem because that means that the scale is now non-uniform. So it's now changed on the X, and that's going to create problems in a lot of workflows, including a non-destructive workflow where certain operations that follow on from this might be adversely affected. So we need to press Control A to apply that scale change so that we now have a uniform scale at the object level. I also want to make sure that this plane is not sitting right at weld 0. So I'm going to move this up on the Z 256 millimeters, and now it sits nicely on top of our base. I want to round the top and the bottom of this stem. So I'm going to press Tab to enter edit mode. And I want to make sure I have each of the 4 vertices selected. Press Shift 2 to bring up ND and choose Bevels, Vertex Bevel. I'm going to type in a width of 30 millimeters, and I'm going to hold down Alt, and I want maybe 16 segments so they get a nice round result. I'm going to press Enter to confirm. I'll press Tab to exit edit mode and go back to object mode. Now, before I extrude this, I want to make sure that I keep organized. So I'm going to make sure this is called stem. And I'm going to go into perspective view here so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to press Shift 2. We go extrusion, solidify. And we want this to be 6 millimeters thick. So I press 6 and then enter to confirm. I want to add a bevel to this stem. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so I can see what I'm doing. And I'm going to press Shift 2 and go Bevels, Bevel. And in this case, I think I want maybe 1 millimeter. And if I hold down Alt, maybe we'll go with 3 segments. And hit Enter to confirm. That looks okay, except the shading is not quite right. So I'm going to press Shift 2 and go Shading, Weighted Normals. Okay, so now we have the basic shape of our stem. The next thing we want to do is cut a similar shape out of the middle of this. So to achieve that, I'm going to go into front view again. And I want to duplicate this object. So I'm going to press Shift D. And you can, of course, move it around, but we want it to stay in the same place. So I'm going to right click to confirm. And then I make sure that I rename this in the outliner to stem cutter. So we have our stem cutter object, but it's too big. You could, of course, change the dimensions here at an object level, but ND has a little trick up its sleeve. Press Tab to enter edit mode, and then select the 2 longest edges. Press Shift 2 and go to Sketch, Edge Length. Now this is a little operator that allows us to exactly set the actual length that we want. It has a few different options. I'm going to press D to change it to absolute mode. You can see the edges are currently 480 millimeters, but if I type 460, I can now set it exactly, and I can hit Enter to confirm. I want to do the same with the short edges. So I'm going to select those. They're not very visible, so I'm going to press Alt-Z to turn on the X-ray. And if I press Shift 2 again, Sketch, Edge Length, I want absolute mode, so I press D, and then the distance, I want that to be 10 millimeters, and Enter to confirm. I'm going to head out of edit mode into object mode, and I'm going to press Alt-Z to toggle the X-ray off. Changing to perspective view, you can see that the stem cutter is the exact width of the stem. We want a Boolean that cutter out of the stem, so we need to make it a bit thicker. Press Shift 2 and go to Extrusion, Solidify, and just go ahead and scroll to increase that. It doesn't matter if it's a little bit wider, that's totally fine. It just needs to protrude either side. And with the stem cutter selected, press Shift and then click on the stem. And then press Shift 2 and go Booleans, Difference. There you go, it's cut that hole out. Now I don't need to see the utility anymore, so I'm going to press Alt-V and click Utils Visibility. Great, now we've got that nice hole cut out of the stem. Looking good. Okay, the next piece I want to focus on is the lamp head and how it attaches to this stem like a rail. It's adjustable up and down, and to do this, it has a little rotating handle and a clamp. So if we go into front view, what I want to do is start creating that handle. So press Shift A, go Mesh Plane, make sure it's aligned to the view, and we want this to be 16 millimeters, so quite small. I'm going to move that up a bit, and if I switch into top view for a moment, I also want to make sure that it's not directly in the center of the stem, so I'm going to move it back to 10 mils. So we're going to have a handle, and then we're going to have the clamp, and then the head of the lamp will attach to it. Back in front view, I want to go Shift 2, Sketch, Circularize, and I want 8 segments. I think that's about right. Now we want to make that actually extrude, so I'm going to go Shift 2, Extrusion, Solidify. In this case, it's 48 millimeters long. And I want to press W until I get the negative weighting and click to confirm. That looks pretty good. Might go ahead and name that to handle. And if I zoom in a bit, the handle has a chamfer. So I'm going to go Shift 2, Bevels, Bevel, and I'm going to use 3 mils and click confirm. But it also has kind of an additional rounding, so we don't have that super sharp edge. We've got the 45-degree chamfer, but we want a slight rounding as well. And you can do that by adding another bevel modifier to the stack. And ND helps you do this. So if you press Shift 2 and go bevel, and you hover over the bevel options, you can see that if you hold down Control, you can remove the existing modifier, or if you press Shift, you can create a stacked bevel modifier. So I'm going to hold down Shift and click. I want this one to be quite small, so 0.5. Holding down Alt now, I think maybe 3 segments. That looks okay. And I'll hit Enter to confirm. Now the shading looks a little bit different, so I might just apply a weighted normal. So Shift 2, Shading, Weighted Normals, and there was a subtle change there, but it looks slightly better. Great. We've got the handle, but now we need the clamp. So I'm going to, instead of creating this from scratch, I'm going to select the handle and press Shift D and then right click to confirm. Straight away, I'm just going to rename this to clamp. I might call it clamp A because there's actually 2 pieces. And if I move into top view for a moment and zoom in, we want to move this back to the origin. So I'm going to type 0 in the Y. If I go Shift 2 and solidify, so extrusion solidify, I want this to be 10 mils so that it meets the handle. I'm going to hit Enter to confirm. And we want to remove the first chamfer. So with that object selected, I may as well just walk backwards through the modifier stack here. There's a bevel here, and if I just turn that off temporarily, you can see that's the fine bevel. And if I look at this other one here, turn that on and off, that's the big chamfer. So I want to go ahead and delete that. And we won't need this associated weld, so I can also delete that. And there we go. We've managed to duplicate that quickly, and we've kind of got the start of our clamp. Back in top view, we're going to press Alt-Z to enter X-ray mode, and you can see that the part of the clamp obviously intersects within the stem itself. So let's fix that. Now, right now, our 3D cursor is at the weld origin, but I want to move it upwards. So I press Shift-S and do cursor to selected. Now it's perfectly aligned. Back in top view, I can go Shift-A, Mesh Plane. I want this one to be quite small, maybe 6 mils. And we'll move it 8 mils to the right, and that should align it with the stem. Now we've got a little plane. And if I go into 3D view here, I'm going to go Shift 2, Extrusion, Solidify, and something like 20 should be enough that it's going to be a useful Boolean cutter for our clamp. So I'm going to go ahead and call that clamp cutter. But it happens on both sides, so we need a way to mirror this. If you shift click onto the clamp, ND can also help you with this. Press Shift 2, replicate, mirror. And in this case, it's guessed the axis correctly, and it's mirrored it across the object that we had selected. But if you find that it's not correct, you can press A to change through the different axes. And sometimes it gets the orientation wrong, so you can press F to flip it. It got it right initially, but you've got a few different options there. And you click to confirm. Now, we won't really be able to see how a Boolean is working unless we hide the stem, so I'm going to do that. And I may as well come out of X-ray mode, so Alt-Z. And if I select my clamp cutter and my clamp, I can go Shift-2, Boolean difference, and I'll hide the utility, so Alt-V, utils visibility, and there we go, that's worked. But you will notice a little bit of a shading issue here. Maybe we can fix that by going Shift-2, shading, weighted normals. Nothing seems to have changed. So let's have a look at the underlying geometry. So if I go Alt-V, turn on the wireframes, okay, we can kind of see what's going on here. It's a bit of an awkward polygon. There's sort of thin triangles that are being divided when it actually gets shaded. And so the normals are a bit messed up, not ideal. Sometimes this happens when you're using a non-destructive workflow in Blender. One thing you can try is if we go Shift-2, Sketch, and Circularize, if we go back to those base segments, sometimes you can adjust it to a point where it works a bit more effectively. So you can kind of see here, at 9 segments that shading looks better, but then you can also see, if I click to confirm, that the geometry looks a bit messy there. So I'm going to undo that. Maybe this is something I can't fix right now, and I could maybe think about later on in the process. It's quite a small component, so we probably won't see that shading irregularity in our render. So sometimes you can ignore these things, but there are also little fixes you can take manually at a later stage, which we might explore. So I'm going to ignore that problem for now. Okay, I might turn off the wireframes, press Alt-V, go wireframes, and I actually need 2 of these clamps, one on either side. Turn the stem back on so we can see how that works. Now, if I were to mirror this clamp, the vertices at the center would try and merge, and we don't really want that. So what we need instead is a duplicate. So if you press Shift-D to duplicate using Blender's duplicate function, you'll notice that the duplicate is missing the Boolean. And that's because by default, it doesn't duplicate the children, in this case, the Boolean cutter in the process. So I'm going to go Escape and cancel that. And then I'm going to press Undo to get rid of it. What we can do instead is use a little helper built into ND. So if I press Shift-2, then go down to Utilities, if I hover over Smart Duplicate, it says that it can duplicate the selected objects with their utils. So if you've got Booleans applied or any other utilities, Smart Duplicate will duplicate those as well. So let's do that. Let's click Smart Duplicate and click to confirm. Now, if I press G and move this around, you can see that it retains the Boolean. I'm going to right click to cancel that. We've got our clamp B here, so I'm going to name that clamp B. And then it's pretty much as simple as rotating it on the Z axis 180 degrees. And we've got our second clamp. The next piece we need in the clamp assembly is a little connection between the clamp B and the lamp head. Now, we could potentially duplicate one of these existing objects, but it might be simpler in this case just to pop into the front view, press Shift-A and add a plane, align that to the view, and in this case we want it to be 14 millimeters, so it's slightly smaller than the clamp and the handle. Just like before, we want to go Shift-2 and want to go Sketch, Circularize, and in this case I think we're probably going to want roughly the same segments, so let's go with 8. Looks all right. Jump to top view for a second. Let's just move that, maybe it's negative, maybe -10. If we move back into perspective, we can go Shift-2, Extrusion, Solidify, and this is quite a narrow piece, so it's 2 millimeters, and it's got neutral weighting right now, but I want it to be positive. So press W and then hit Enter to confirm. Now this is a little piece that sits between 2 pieces, and so I don't really think I need to add a bevel to that. I'm just going to leave that as is. I want to make sure I stay organized again, so I'm going to name this to clamp connector. Great. Now for the next piece, I might go ahead and actually hide in the outliner the clamp and the connector, and the handle and the stem. And I want to jump into front view, so I'm going to press 1 on the numpad. If I zoom out a tiny bit as well, what I want to do is create this lamp head, and I'm going to use a different method. So I'm going to press Shift 2 and go Sketch, Single Vertex. Now that does exactly what it says on the tin. It adds an object literally with a single vertex. And you'll notice that we're in edit mode automatically. This means that if we press E to extrude, we can start moving this out, and I'm going to hold down Control to snap this to the grid. And I'm looking up in the transform because I want this to be 70 millimeters long. So there we go. I'll just move sideways so I can see. And then I want to press E to extrude again and move this downwards. And I want this to be 16 mils thick. So that's created a profile that we can now revolve. So if I move into 3D view and perspective, I press Shift 2, I can go to Extrusion, Screw, and ND applies a screw modifier. And if we increase the segments, you'll see that that creates a nice result. I might increase mine up to maybe 48. That looks pretty good. If I want to just confirm what that looks like as a wireframe, press Alt-V and go into wireframes. And yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I could always increase it later if I want to. But there's a little detail we need to address, which is that the edge here is actually rounded whilst it's flat on the bottom. So how do we achieve that? Well, if you go into front view for a moment and press Tab, if you go back to this corner vertex, we can apply a vertex bevel. So press Shift 2, Bevels, Vertex Bevel. And I'm going to go with 2 millimeters and maybe holding down Alt, I'll go 4 segments. That should be pretty good. And now we've got that nicely rounded edge. Tab out into object mode, Alt-V to turn the wireframes off. And for good measure, I think we'll apply shading, weighted normals. There we go. That's fixed a few little issues. And I'm going to rename this object to lamp head. It's a shell, but it's not paper thin. So the next thing we need to do is go Shift 2, Extrusion, Solidify, and we want a thickness of 1 millimeter. And there we go. That looks good. Now, I looked closely and I noticed that the dimensions of this are not quite what I wanted. I wanted 140, 140, and 16. So something's gone a little bit wrong here. If I jump back into front view, pressing numpad 1, press Alt-Z to turn on X-ray, you can see that in adding thickness here, it's actually made it a little bit, the overall object a bit wider. So all I've got to do is press Shift 2, Extrusion, Solidify, and I want to play with the weighting. So if I press W, it goes to positive mode, and you can see that that's what we want. So I click to confirm, and now the object's back to 140, 140, and 16. If I press Alt-Z, go turn that X-ray mode back off, and I might turn the stem and the handle and the clamp connector and the clamp back on. And I'm going to reposition this lamp head to -81. If I jump into front view for a second, or maybe side view, I want to move that up as well. So let's try 368. And there we go. It's perfectly aligned. Now, if we jump into perspective view for a moment, you might notice that the number of segments in this lamp head kind of jars with the level of detail on the stem and the clamp handle. And this is one of the greatest benefits of the non-destructive workflow, because we can simply select that lamp head, press Shift 2, go Extrusion Screw, and press X to clear the segments. And then I'm going to type in 64. That looks a lot better to me, so I hit confirm. And that's how easy it is to just fix that kind of issue. If you want to balance the detail in your mesh, or you want to increase it depending on how close your camera is going to get in a render. The next part we want to model is the lamp shade. And that's a circular piece of acrylic that's frosted that actually sits between the lamp head and then the bulb shines through it. So to do that, what we want to do is select our lamp head, press Shift S, do cursor to selected. I'm going to change to top view with numpad 7, and we'll just zoom in a bit as well. I'm going to start with a plane, so press Shift A, Mesh, Plane, and in this case, slightly smaller, so 138 millimeters works perfectly. Then we're going to circularize this, so Shift 2, Sketch, Circularize. And in this case, I want 16 segments. That should give me good enough resolution that matches the screw modifier's 64 segments. Okay, great. That's looking pretty good. I just need to move it down a bit. So I'm going to minus 16 millimeters on the Z-axis. And then it's got some thickness as well. So I might also solidify this. So Shift 2, Extrusion, Solidify, and we'll give that a thickness of maybe 2 and make sure that the weighting is positive, so it goes upwards. Lastly, let's just check the outliner, make sure we name this appropriately and keep organized. So that's the lamp shade. All right, great. We've finished most of the pieces. Last piece we want to think about now is, of course, a power cord. We can't have a light working without that, so let's move on to that next. To model the power cord, we can actually use another ND feature. Now, the actual power cord connects somewhere around this clamp and the clamp handle. So I'm just going to move the 3D cursor there by pressing Shift S and going cursor to selected. And I want to go into side view with numpad 3. What I'm going to do first is draw a profile with the sketch tool. So if I go Shift 2, Sketch, Single Vertex, I'm then going to extrude this. So I'm going to press E to extrude and move that down. And I might do another one here as if the power cord's curving away from the base, and then another one a bit further away. So E to extrude each time until you get a series of connected vertices. Now, I do want to move that first vertex out a little bit. So I'm going to press Alt Z to make sure I'm in X-ray mode. And I'm just going to grab that vertex and move it kind of to the center, a little bit away from the stem. Click to confirm, and then we'll tab out of edit mode. We'll turn off X-ray by pressing Alt Z. And the next thing to do is press Shift 2 and go to Generators and Pipe Generator. And as you can see straight away, ND generates a pipe. It's using geometry nodes to do this rather than regular modifiers. But because geometry nodes, a geometry node network actually acts like a modifier, you can stack this on top of underlying modifiers. So we're going to set a profile radius here of 2 millimeters, and I want the base corner radius. You can see there's a little curve between at each vertex. So if I hold down Control, I'm going to increase that quite a lot. Now I might maybe go to about 500. And the reason for that is that you get a nice smooth transition. But also, if I grab this last vertex and I decide that, I don't know, maybe I go on top view, maybe I decide that I want to move these around a bit. So I want a little bit of a curve that way, a bit of curve this way. Maybe I want to extrude this even further. You can see it produces a nice curved result. And there's plenty more to the pipe tool. You can check out our deep dive series to learn more about how ND works, and you can check out our latest video about the pipe tool to understand the kind of intricacies and possibilities with this tool. But yeah, that's how you produce a power cord for our lamp. If you've followed along so far, you should now have a non-destructive lamp. Now, I've obviously taken this a bit further, and I thought I'd show you my render setup. Ultimately, it's quite simple. What I've done here is I've added some plinths, and I wanted to do this so that I've got a kind of little presentation that you might see in a showroom, and I've rotated each lamp, I've changed the height and the angle a little bit, and just provided some material variety as well to create a bit of interest. If I turn on my overlays here and I go down to the viewport shading, you can see I've added an area light to each of the lamps to cast their own light. And then if I just zoom out a bit further to show you the rest of my scene, you can see I've added a very simple backdrop here. I've added an overall area light to fill from the top, a couple to fill from the sides, and then my camera is positioned fairly closely. If I go back into my camera for a moment, one of the reasons I added those two area lights to the side is so that I could control the light landing on the sides of each plinth, but also so that I could control the way the lighting appears on the gradient, the soft transition on some of the surfaces of the lamp that helps highlight its shape and make it look a bit more interesting and less flat. Pretty simple setup, but very effective. Well, I hope this was helpful, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please like and subscribe, and consider joining our Discord community. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.